what I'd like to know is, where did you get the confidence from to make a film with such...
Ignorance. Sheer ignorance. You know, there's no confidence to equal it. I thought you could do anything with a camera that the eye could do, or the imagination could do. And I didn't know that there were things you couldn't do. So anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph.
As always, I'm going to start off this by saying I have no idea what I'm talking about. I have no idea how to take a good photograph. It is a total mystery to me how someone can look through a camera and take a beautiful picture. Because I can look through that same camera at the same subject and not take a beautiful picture at all. However, over the years of watching films, photography, art, and yes, even comic books, I have discovered the principles that all great visual artists commonly use. And now I'm going to teach those principles to you. There are many different established methods of cinematography, like the rule of thirds, the quadrant system, the golden rectangle, and the golden ratio. I have no idea what any of these things mean. I'm also not sure about lenses. I'm not sure what an aperture is. And as many times as it's been explained to me, I'm still not sure what an f-stop is. So if you know what any of these things are, then you're way ahead of the game than I am. And if anyone tells you that this guy has no idea what he's talking about, they'd be right. But that's one of the rules of Bumdog filmmaking, which include steal everything you see. If Bumdog can do it, you have no excuses. And don't let a trivial fact like you don't know what you're doing stop you. And yes, I do make these rules up as I go along. Welcome to the Bumdog School of Film. If you are still with me, I'm going to teach you the 12 shots of cinematography. I want to say something to you right now. If you learn and master these summary 12 shots, I guarantee you, you will be ahead of not just the vast majority of people, but the vast majority of people who call themselves professional photographers. Now that may seem like a large claim, but I stick by it. Now the first rule of composition is, before you even think about looking through the camera, back up. Pay close attention to the composition of this Stanley Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove.
Turgidson, when you instituted the human reliability tests, you assured me there was no possibility of such a thing ever occurring.
Now the lighting of this shot alone is superb. It is a beautiful photograph in and of itself. However, watch what happens when the director simply backs up the camera.
Turgidson, when you instituted the human reliability tests, you assured me there was no possibility of such a thing ever occurring.
By viewing these two frames side by side, we see the effect of enhancing the scope of what we see, and what it takes to make a good shot a great one. In film, this is called establishing the foreground, creating depth in what would otherwise be a flat picture. And it is the first thing that you must look for when composing a shot. Setting up a foreground can be done seamlessly by beginning a shot with it, or by injecting it abruptly into the middle of a scene.
Alas, Martha, in reality it works out that the sacrifice is of a somewhat more private portion of the anatomy.
I wonder if you could show me where the...
Are you all right?
Ow.
Federico Fellini was another director who often insisted that a foreground be installed within his compositions. He would often back up the camera as far as he could until he found one, and if that was not enough, he would inject actors right in front of the camera, for no other reason than to form the foreground for the shot. While composing a frame with a foreground is an act of discipline, keeping that foreground instituted while creating camera movement is an even greater challenge.
They've all got jobs. They all live seemingly normal, decent lives, but they got their problems, and they've all got a little larceny in them. Now, you take my pal Unger, for instance, the guy who owns this apartment.
It's crazy, a stud like you paying that dame that you told me about double sawbucks. You know, with proper management, you could be taking home $50, maybe $100 a day, easy. Hey, Brucey, hang in there, baby.
What's that?
Of course, there will come a time when you have backed up as far as you can and still not be able to find a foreground for the shot. When that happens, instead of backing up, you must close up. While most cinematography is filmed to photograph the basic set, scenery, and action of the movie, at some point in any film, the elimination of distance between character and audience is necessary. To show not just the story, but the actual people within the story, close-ups give the audience a one-on-one encounter of the actual participants of the drama taking place, and gives us intimate knowledge about the characters that maybe no one else in the movie could possibly know. In fact, close-ups can give us a closeness and knowledge that we ourselves are not comfortable with. And when you have closed up as far as you can, the next step is to go down. Low angles are used to create a sense of humility in the scene. It can accentuate the experience of helplessness, vulnerability, and subordination in the face of authority.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach.
In order to get this low-angle shot in Citizen Kane, Orson Welles actually dug through the concrete studio floor to amplify the sense of defeat of his character.
Only you want love on your own terms.
Once we have completely exhausted the possibilities of low angles, then it's time to shoot in the opposite direction, high angles, where low angles give a sense of humility and all too humanness. High angles give an all-knowing power to the viewer, a kind of eye of God, whether that eye be protective, judgmental, or indifferent to the subject's fate. Whether it is only slightly askewed or completely perpendicular. High angles provide the ultimate sensation of enjoyed detachment. Unless you are working on a strictly documentary level, at some point you are going to have to consciously create a composition, which means consciously creating a background. And when I say consciously create, I'm not talking about simple set design. What I am talking about is background that specifically serves the scene in some way. It can be done by creating action in the background, or simply adding color to the background. Either to vividly illustrate the dominant personality traits of a character,
away this weekend. Who needs a festival of my old films? It's
their state of mind, or their situation. There is also a specific background commentary that is used throughout Dr. Strangelove, where in the face of war and nuclear annihilation, the sign, "Peace is our profession," is in the background.
I'll give you 3 simple rules. First, trust no one.
This type of deliberate background commentary is used throughout Midnight Cowboy, with the backgrounds often directly denoting the situations of the main characters. One of the lead characters is Joe Buck, who has come to New York with dreams of becoming a male hustler for wealthy, sex-starved women. The reoccurring motif in his backgrounds are mirrors that are often surrounded by photos of women and cowboys. On the opposite end is his companion Ratso Rizzo, who dreams of one day escaping New York and making a life-changing trip to Florida. In his backgrounds, we will see posters of beaches, oranges, and people frolicking in the Florida sun.
There's no heat here, but, you know, by the time winter comes, I'll be in Florida.
when I'm feeling cool and good, I'll spin around. And there you are, you handsome devil, you.
Not bad. Not bad. For a cowboy.
When you look closer, you'll notice pasted on the wall an advertisement I Buy What My Husband Can't Give, a background commentary on his goal of becoming a male escort.
You're okay. You're okay.
Now we will discuss a rare achievement in cinematography, combining several different compositional effects into one shot. Like what happens when you combine a conscious background with a conscious foreground. You get a midground. This is the most complete composition in cinema, as well as being the most difficult to achieve.
For you, Hank.
Let her go.
You don't even want to question the daughter?
Let her go and put a tail on her.
In this composition, first we only see a midshot, but as another person emerges, he becomes a foreground, and when a third person appears, we have a complete depth of field.
Which means we're bust. All right.
Well, out of cash.
All right, Mr. Bernstein. I've read it, Mr. Thatcher. Let me sign it, and I'll go home.
Here in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, notice how from one angle, George Segal establishes the foreground, but when the angle is reversed, all three actors form foreground, midground, and background, and play close attention to Sandy Dennis's acting in the background as Elizabeth Taylor flirts with her husband.
Handy. I was going to say, why give it up until you have to?
I couldn't agree with you more.
155, 150,
Still at the old middleweight limit. That's pretty good. Hey, George.
In this scene from 8½, Fellini not only establishes foreground, midground, and background, he actually sustains it with camera movement.
Mi chante aussi.
Si avvicina molto, vengo subito.
By giving the viewer 3 dimensions of sight, the audience is provided with a complete sense of vision. But the most complete visual that can be achieved is when you capture not only what is viewed, but all that can possibly be viewed. This is what is known as an environmental shot. Environmental shots simultaneously go beyond the scope of the eye of God of a simple high-angle shot, at the same time creating a far greater sense of humility than in a low-angle shot. Here in Stanley Kubrick's 2001, the images of space and its overwhelming vastness made audiences aware of their insignificant existence in the face of an infinite universe. Back on planet Earth, in Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean used environmental photography to capture visually man in the context of an endless landscape of desert, sun, and sand. But environmental cinematography is not reserved for nature only. One of the best examples of environmental cinematography was Gordon Willis's work on Woody Allen's Manhattan. The visuals managed to capture not only the city in all of its glory, but its powerful effect on the people who live in it. Even though the movie is entirely conversational, it is always the city and the surrounding environment that occupies more space than the speakers. Even close-ups of the actors take up less than 50% of the composition. Notice in this 3-way conversation how even hallways and street traffic is given more dominance over the characters.
Hello?
Mary, hi, it's Yale. I was hoping you'd pick up.
I'm sorry, I gotta go.
Who was that?
What?
Who was that on the phone just now?
Dance lessons.
Dance lessons?
From environmental shots, we now move on to perspective shots. Now this may look like a simple environmental shot of the desert, but the black rider that approaches creates a focal point which creates a conversion of perspective lines, hence the phrase perspective shot. Now when this happens within any type of structure, this is called a tunnel shot. Tunnel shots give a periscope-like view into the future, a future that can either be going forthcoming. These perspective shots and tunnel shots give rise to another element, silhouettes. Silhouettes highlight the instinctual level of light and darkness, but now we are focused on the darkness instead of the light. It forces the viewer into a certain state of intuition or state of already knowing, where they have to know what they are looking at, even though they do not actually see what they're looking at. When a character is in silhouette, it forces the viewer into its stored memory, and if there is no original memory, it creates fear, heightening a sense of danger or mystery of the unknown. The inverse image of a silhouette is what I call shadow play. With a play on light and darkness, shadow play has the same effect as silhouettes, in that it forces the viewer into a sense of recognition.
Hello, Marion.
Indiana Jones.
And if that recognition is not forthcoming, it will create the same type of fear of unknown danger.
Hello, Louis. Face the wall. Put your mitts up. All of you.
Came back and
Shadow play can be used to create characters in and of themselves. By creating a representation of a character, the shadows can often evolve into their own identity. Like Plato's cave, shadow play is only valid when the original forms are not in view, giving the impression of seeing something that you are not actually seeing, which mirrors the effect of film itself. And speaking of mirroring the effect of film, we move on to our next rule of film.
Oh, yeah. What did you...
Which is reflections. The reflection shot is the clearest example of photography's ability to see what you are not seeing. To be a complete reflection shot, the actual person must not be in the frame. For example, here the main actor, Akim Tamarov, is not in reflection. The two actors, Janet Leigh and Lalo Rios, in the background are.
Isn't Grandy what that nightclub is called?
Yeah?
Likewise, this is not a reflection shot. This is. And as with anything done with mirrors, there are many tricks that can be done with reflections.
On a Tuesday morning, Johnny Clay began the final preparations.
Sometimes these reflections are used to express the inner thoughts of a character or the outer.
Of course, killing you is killing myself. It's the same thing. But you know, I'm pretty tired of both of us.
And the context in which these mirrors are placed can also reflect the characters as well. And when you take out the actual mirror, you are left with just the frame itself. All good cinematic images imitate how human vision affects the mind. Are you watching this now on a computer or your cell phone? The more limited the frame, the more the initial frustration. However, after a few moments of interested focus, we become oblivious to everything outside of that frame, regardless of its restricted apparatus. The so-called frame within a frame shot mimics this initial frustration to create the interested focus on any subject that the director chooses. It forces the viewer to concentrate and block out even more information on the screen itself. In cinematic terms, it is the closest relative to the foreground shot, simply more controlled. It also has the effect of reminding the viewer that it is watching a limited vision of a limited vision. One might think that the frame within a frame is as deep as a filmmaker can take the mind of the viewer, but that's not true. There are directors who take great pleasure in taking the audience even further down the rabbit hole of their images. Detailed shots, or what are more commonly known as extreme close-ups, focus such extreme attention on an image that genuine attention actually shuts down and gives any scene a truly hypnotic pause in the action.
I fucking hate that. I don't like to be told what to listen to, when to listen to it, or anything.
The three directors most known for detailed shots are Paul Thomas Anderson, Quentin Tarantino, and Martin Scorsese. Another form of getting detailed shots is shooting in slow motion. It can illustrate the detailed thoughts of a character or the details of action that are invisible to the human eye at normal speed. The next shot we shall discuss is not going to be numbered, because it's one of the most overused shots in film and television. It's called the mid-shot. In truly bad cinematography, you will see these mid-shots all the time. In truly great cinematography, you almost won't see it at all. This scene from Lawrence of Arabia may seem like a mid-shot if you saw it on a television screen, but in the original form, it is actually an environmental shot.
We ourselves kill. We leave no wounded for the Turks. You mean? I mean we leave no wounded for the Turks. In their eyes, we are not soldiers, but rebels.
My Dinner with Andre is one of the least cinematically shot films, and yet is one of the great classics of pure cinema. The entire movie is just two people talking over dinner. And this is the main purpose of mid-shots. They are solely for conversation. They should be avoided at all costs, except when conversing. However, even when conversing, there are simple ways of avoiding mid-shots. The most common is establishing a foreground with another actor. This is known as an over-the-shoulder shot, or OTS. However, when mid-shots absolutely have to be used, it's best to use them sparingly. One sentence, one word, or complete silence.
Then, young friend, I will make you an offer you cannot refuse. I will do it for free. Do you have someone?
How could you do that, Benjamin? Do you just hate everything? How could you possibly rape my mother?
What?
I don't understand.
I used to get a lawyer, another guy's a doctor. Another guy dies, another guy gets well, and, you know, people are born. I envy you, you.
Although Wells establishes many foregrounds in the shot, this is an excellent example of how to use mid-shots sparsely and for conversation use only.
Charles, even newspapermen have to sleep.
I'll call Mr. Bernstein, have him put off my appointments until noon. What time is it?
Oh, I don't know, it's late.
It's early.
Charles, do you know how long you kept me waiting last night while you went to the newspaper for 10 minutes? What do you do in a newspaper in the middle of the night?
Emily, my dear, your only correspondent is the Inquirer.
Sometimes I think I'd prefer a rival of flesh and blood.
Oh, Emily, I don't spend that much time on the newspaper.
It isn't just the time. It's what you print. Attacking the president.
You mean Uncle John?
I mean the president of the United States.
He's still Uncle John. He's still a well-meaning fathead who's letting a pack of high-pressure crooks run his administration. This whole oil scandal.
He happens to be the president, Charles, not you.
That's a mistake that will be corrected one of these days.
Your Mr. Bernstein sent Junior the most incredible atrocity yesterday, Charles. I simply can't have it in the nursery.
Mr. Bernstein is apt to pay a visit to the nursery now and then.
Does he have to?
Yes.
Really, Charles? People will think...
What I tell them to think. It's early.
Notice how the camera movement symbolizes time passing. This is one of the more simple ways of creating symbolism in cinema. This next compositional element is not numbered either, but it's not because it's so often used, but because it's so rare, and that is symbolism. Symbolism is only infrequently thought of as a facet of cinematography because it is more often the job of the special effects department than the direct responsibility of the man behind the camera, and it is usually kept within the genre of science fiction or fantasy art films. Regardless, it is still within the sphere of composition, which puts it in the domain of the cinematographer.
Scusi per l'invasione così mattutina.
And it can be done with something as simply cinematic as shadows, it can also be done through camera movement, or even just camera focus. It can be used in a moment to punctuate comedy.
Oh, man, let's go get a steak.
You can get a steak here, Daddy-O. Don't be a...
Oh, after you, kitty cat.
Or to sustain a longer moment of horror. It can be done with very simple set design or very involved, complicated ones.
You're stoned and you're driving.
Yeah, the pot balances it out. The pot brings it back up. That's why I smoke it. If I'm going to be drinking, then I'll smoke it. It does. That's a medical test that was done. That's proven on the science
Honey,
network.
just watch the
I can't see shit.
One of the great works of symbolist cinema is Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. Made in 1930, it still incorporates all the modern techniques of achieving symbolism. The story is of a man tempted to kill his wife for his mistress. but who instead eventually falls in love with her all over again. Before we talked about what happens when you combine certain shots together. Now let's see how certain directors move between these shots with editing and camera movement. In the opening of the Ecclesiastes, watch how director Michelangelo Antonio uses several different shots through editing and camera movement in just a few minutes.
Io vado, caro.
Devi andare da qualche parte.
In this quite famous scene, you will see several different shots flow together, most noticeably close-ups, but also foregrounds, low angles, and high angles.
Thought that naturally...
Stop it, Martha.
Oh, what do you want?
I wouldn't go on with this if I were you.
Oh, you wouldn't, would you? Would you not?
You've already sprung a leak about you know what.
What? What?
About the sprout, the little bugger, our son. If you start in this other business, Martha, I warn you.
I stand warned.
Do we really have to go through all this?
So anyway, I married the SOB. I had it all planned out. First, he'd take over the history department. Then when Daddy retired, he'd take over the whole college, you know? That was the way it was supposed to be. Getting angry, baby, huh? That was the way it was supposed to be. All very simple. And Daddy thought it was a good idea, too, for a while. Until he started watching for a couple of years. Getting angrier? Until he watched for a couple of years and started thinking that maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all, that maybe Georgie boy didn't have the stuff, that maybe he didn't have it in him.
Stop it, Martha.
Like hell I will. You see, George didn't have much push. He wasn't particularly aggressive. In fact, he was sort of a flop. A great, big, fat flop.
Stop it, Martha.
I hope that was an empty bottle, George. You can't afford to waste good liquor. Not on your salary, not on an associate professor's salary. So here I am, stuck with this flop, this bog in the history department.
Martha.
Who's married to the president's daughter. Who's expected to be somebody, not just a nobody, a bookworm who's so goddamn complacent that makes anything out of himself, that doesn't have the guts to make anybody proud of him.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
All right, George, stop it! I'm gonna be sick. I'm gonna be sick.
In his equally famous opening, Orson Welles combined several different elements into one fluid shot without editing at all. At the ending of the same film, notice the background commentary of bullfights and butchered bulls, symbolizing the character himself as he is about to be trapped and gored. In what is arguably the most famous camera movement seen in cinema, notice how we move from an environmental shot to a frame shot, to foreground, and finally to foreground, background, midground, and frame shot, all in one.
It's going to be done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to. A boarder that beats his bill and leaves worthless stock behind.
Now we're going to look at the composition of an entire film. Fritz Lang's M, about a serial killer stalking young girls in a German city.
Ihr sollt das verfluchte Lied nicht singen, habe ich euch gesagt.
Now, I'm not a film historian, but for my money, this is the best shot in the history of cinema. You see the background displaying 10,000 marks for the capture of a murderer. Then we see the ball, which symbolizes a little girl. Then we see the shadow of a man who we know is the murderer. This tells us everything we need to know, but yet we're not actually seeing anything. It mirrors reality, but it is not the reality itself. The ultimate example of pure cinema.
Du hast aber einen schönen Ball. Wie heißt du denn?
Else Beckmann. Dankeschön. Elsie! Elsie! Elsie!
Ist ja furchtbar.
Vorlesen. Der unbekannte Bürger. Ruhe! Der Schreckmund der Stadt hat ein neues Opfer gefordert. Kinder vor der Gefahr, in ihren ständig schweben, zu warnen.
Zion oder Chinwon?
Bitte?
Was wollen Sie denn von den Tieren?
Gar nichts wie.
Doch noch irgendetwas Verwendbares zu finden. Das sind
Rot! Grün! Rot! Grün!
Bettler. Die Organisation.
Der Block ist noch umstellt. Wenn er überhaupt noch.
If you would like to see more movies in the context of these 12 shots, look for the extended version of this video, where we will take a full look at such films as Westside Story, The Graduate,
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
Taxi Driver, Kung Fu Hustle, Fantasia, and of course Citizen Kane.
Get in touch with everybody that ever knew.
And the next lesson in the Bumdog School of Film will be sound. My name is Bumdog Torres, and thank you very much for watching.